Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. This is Season 12, Episode 17. Today I'm speaking with chef food writer Paul Fehribach, who is a 7-time James Beard Awards semifinalist for Best Chef, Great Lakes, and owner of the critically acclaimed Chicago restaurant, Big Jones. Fehribach is the author of the Big Jones Cookbook, Recipes for Savoring the Heritage and Regional Southern Cooking, and the new book, Midwestern Food, A Chef's Guide to the Surprising History of a Great American Cuisine, which is out today. It's such a big thrill to talk with Paul, who is very generous with his time. I love the Big Jones Cookbook, and any foodie in America will love the book, Midwestern Food. This is not just recipes, but the histories of where and why of American cooking. For those of you who live outside the United States, this is a really important cookbook and worth purchasing. If you want to see beyond hamburgers and hot dogs, this book has so many treasures of American cooking. I'm going to take you now to my conversation with chef, food writer, Paul Fehribach. Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today we're speaking with chef, food writer, Paul Fehribach, who is the 7-time James Beard Awards semifinalist for Best Chef, Great Lakes, and owner of the critically acclaimed Chicago restaurant Big Jones. Fehribach is the author of the Big Jones Cookbook, Recipes for Savoring the Heritage of Regional Southern Cooking, and the new book, out today, Midwestern Food, A Chef's Guide to the Surprising History of a Great American Cuisine. Paul, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
When you were young, was there anybody that kind of inspired your love of food and cooking?
Yeah, I mean, my mom, obviously. I mean, I think that's a common trope, and also my grandmother on my mom's side, who I knew growing up. I think my Aunt Rita was actually really inspiring. She's the wife of my godfather, Lee Gress, and I think I talk about her in the opening of the chapter on side dishes. And she was just a really phenomenal home cook. And like one of my earliest food memories was actually her and her daughters making blackberry pies after we had gone out to the blackberry patch on Grandpa's farm and picked blackberries. So just that exposure to real cooking from a very young age was very much something that determined my direction for life.
Were there any foods that kind of stuck with you over time that you still love today that you kind of use in the restaurant?
That we use in the restaurant, I don't know. I mean, I love blackberries because, again, one of my earliest food memories. So we do everything we can with blackberries in season. Strawberries, the same thing. I mean, when you think about foods when you're young, you like sweet things or fruits or candies and that sort of thing. And so, you pick strawberries were a big thing back then. I guess they still have you pick farms, but go out to the strawberry farms and pick strawberries and take them back and make shortcake and pie and all of those other kinds of things. So mostly berries.
That's very understandable. I love berries myself.
And biscuits, I guess. Biscuits is probably the first thing I learned how to cook. And we make them every day. I've made biscuits already this morning here at the restaurant.
Biscuits are a wonderful thing. I learned to cook them from my grandmother, and I think it's a great thing to always be able to do if you need to make something for other people. People always love biscuits.
Yep.
Now, your first restaurant work was at the High Ricky Noodle shop in Chicago. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That wasn't really my first restaurant work. It was kind of the restaurant where I sort of found my footing in Chicago after I'd moved here from Indiana. I'd already been in the industry. I was the general manager at their Southport location, which was the highest volume one.
Oh, wow.
And because I had culinary experience, I helped the owners and the kitchen managers I was the culinary guy of the management, sort of working with, we had a lot of Thai and Vietnamese cooks in the kitchen. And, so sort of working with the kitchen managers and making these dishes, sort of standardizing them across the locations, making sure there were recipes, basically doing the chef work on the back end of them, although my role was as general manager. It was a great experience. I miss that job a lot all the time, and most of us actually who worked there way back when are still in touch. Friends, I think two of them are married now and have kids. But we had probably on any given day at least 5 languages spoken in that restaurant. We had Thai, Vietnamese, Cantonese. There was usually Filipinos in the kitchen and people from Latin America, in addition to the white hipster waiters. And so it was very multicultural, and a great learning experience from that perspective, and a great I learned a lot about managing people, just by taking all of these people with disparate backgrounds and forming them into a cohesive team.
You won a James Beard Award at a very young age. I'm sorry, I'm going to edit that out. Let me redo that. You got a James Beard nomination at a pretty young age. What was that like for you? I could imagine it would put you under a lot of pressure.
Oh, I didn't even really know what it was. And I got an invitation to go to this dinner or event, and I don't know, I just worked.
Yeah.
I never really follow. I mean, I guess, the more nominations, and certainly with my own restaurant where I'm, more intimately concerned with putting butts in seats than I ever was working for other people. Although, it's your job, you're always concerned with that.
Yeah.
I never really cared about stuff like that. That's not why I do what I do, awards and recognition. But, now it's like, I'd love to win one because it would make the restaurant busier and I'd have more opportunities for my people. But
yeah.
I mean, at the time I really had no clue.
You were the executive chef and co-owner of Big Jones in Andersonville in Chicago, where you were dedicated to preserving and resurrecting dishes from a wide variety of Southern cuisines. Can you talk about where the idea to open this restaurant came from and what you were envisioning for it?
As far as what I was envisioning for it, I guess maybe a Southern home away from home in Chicago. But I guess I was, maybe strikingly not visionary when I opened it. I really, I had a chance finally after many years of saving money, gaining experience working where I thought I could gain the most experience to eventually have my own restaurant. And I finally got into a position where I could do it. And I really wanted to cook something that was maybe outside of the box a little bit. And I wanted to cook food, obviously, that I liked and could eat every day. And at the time, nobody, this is, 2006, 2007, when the ideas are forming. And 2007 was when things get really real. We signed the lease and all of that. But I was really thinking at the time, nobody was taking Southern food seriously. There were some really good soul food restaurants on the South and West Side, but and this is a whole separate conversation. Southern food is soul food is derivative of Southern food. It's not really. Southern food is this really broad regional thing. It's very different from the coastal Carolinas to the mountain South to the Gulf Coast and the deep South and everywhere in between. And that's kind of why the Big Jones Cookbook is structured the way it is. But I didn't think anybody was taking Southern food seriously, and as a regional cuisine, like you would open an Italian restaurant or like you would open a French restaurant. So I thought I would open a Southern restaurant and treat this food like the great regional cuisine that it is, and take it very, very seriously. And so that was sort of where the idea came from. And I guess when we opened, it was I got really tired of the question. So why did you decide to open a Southern restaurant? Like, it was some really, but it's funny because it was kind of a very out of the box thing to do at the time.
Yeah.
Nobody was open. Nobody was doing, now there's a million Southern restaurants, but nobody had really done what I'd done and say, Southern cuisine is a real regional cuisine, and doing it that way. But people would ask me this question out of curiosity, whereas, if I open an Italian restaurant, nobody would ask me, hey, why'd you decide to open an Italian restaurant?
Yeah.
Everybody thought it was really weird that somebody decided to open a Southern restaurant. And I was just like, well, wait and see. You'll understand why I wanted to do Southern food.
Now, you wrote the Big Jones Cookbook, Recipes for Savoring the Heritage of Regional Southern Cuisine. Now, did writing this book, it is a cookbook and you had a chance to highlight what you were doing in the restaurant, but also did it give you a chance to talk about this topic a little bit?
Yeah, it did. And I laid out the book by region, or dishes inspired by and coming from a region. I think a lot of times chefs say, oh, this is inspired by such and such cuisine. And, I definitely wanted to create a more accurate representation of Southern food. And notice I didn't use the word authenticity. That's kind of a loaded term.
Yeah.
And so, I was trying to fish dishes out of a regional context and sort of portray them in that way. And some of them are not necessarily truly accurate, historical or regional representations, but they are kind of more loosely inspired by the foods of a region. But mostly I've tried to be really true and honest about Southern cuisine, because we were the first at the time, really out anywhere in the country outside the South, to approach Southern food in this way. And I thought it was really important to be true to the cuisine, and not, sort of play around with it too much, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so the Big Jones Cookbook, I think, a lot of people thought maybe the recipes in it were too straightforward. And I don't know. I mean, I think if, something like a buttermilk pie is just so damn perfect, why do you need to put a spin on it, or why do you need to do something else with it? Or something like fried chicken. Yeah, there's a million different ways you can make fried chicken, but I don't need to, make my fried chicken doesn't need sauce. So it's,
yeah,
there's no reason to, go and make this elaborate dish out of fried chicken. It's just like, make fried chicken and it's perfect. So if it's a perfect food, why do I need to go put a chefy spin on it? And, where my experience as a chef comes in is that we do these dishes, I think, better than anybody else can, because of the experience we have doing them. So, yeah, we make buttermilk biscuits. We don't try to do anything, chefy or fancy with them. We just make the best damn biscuits we can. And the Big Jones Cookbook is sort of represents Southern food in that way by region.
So I want to talk about your new cookbook, the one that's out today, mainly because I just really loved it. And I'm a food nerd and I love eating a lot of different foods that I've grown up eating. Things like chow chow, piccalilli, things like that were things that I grew up with. So I was really kind of very thrilled and happy to see somebody talk about these things, because to me, they're very American and they're very much part of our heritage food wise. And I just love the book. I loved you talking very authoritatively about these topics. And it was just such a fun book for me to read. Now, for those of you who are listening to the podcast, the book is Midwestern Food, A Chef's Guide to the Surprising History of the Great American Cuisine, with more than 100 tasty recipes. Can you talk about where the idea for this book came from, other than just, I think, the love of doing it? Because I could feel a lot of love and joy in this book.
Yes, I mean, I moved to Chicago in the mid 90s, and sort of was on my own, at least, or more independent of my family. And it was, had moved away, farther away, and I wasn't spending as much time at home. And over the course of the 2000s, as I got closer and closer to being able to do my own restaurant, and maybe had a little bit more free time, I started to go home a little bit more, because also my parents were aging. And I sort of maybe started to look at all of these old cafes that had been there for these Indiana cafes that had been there for 80 years, serving the same food. And just the regional dishes, going to the county fair and checking out the cakes and pies and cookies and things like that. And then I opened Big Jones. I spent a lot of time in the South, learning, researching, tasting, and I sort of was inspired by, I thought every Southern town, and this is true, really, has at least one of these cafes or one of these restaurants that's been there forever, serving, the same food in like a really faithful manner. Just some people would again use the word authentic, but it's certainly authentic to that restaurant. And I admired that a lot, and I thought that was missing. I thought that was something that the Midwest didn't have. But then, I started spending more time going back to Indiana and visiting my family, and I started to realize, and making stops on the way down, and I started to realize, what, actually the Midwest has this too. And we have them in my hometown, but I really took these things for granted growing up because they're there, and you don't think there's anything special. If you're going to eat a breaded pork tenderloin every day, it's not special, it's not unique. You think everybody everywhere eats breaded pork tenderloins. And so that sort of started to grip me a little bit. And also, as Dad got older, I really wanted to, he was the last generation to grow up on a farm with the old Midwestern farmstead foodways, where Grandpa had a smokehouse, Grandma had a chicken coop and a huge kitchen garden. There was a whiskey barrel of sauerkraut in the back porch. There was the Swiss brown dairy cow, and the they had pigs in the yard, and there was a hog butchering every fall, and that was how they ate. And so I would pick Dad's brain more and more for his recollections of things, and I sort of had this idea that I really wanted to document this stuff before this old generation. Like, my Aunt Rita also died during COVID. It wasn't COVID. She lived on 96, I think, but long and very productive life. But she died during COVID. But I mean, I wanted to sort of get these stories down and documented while this old generation was still alive, and that sort of became the beginnings of this book. And it sort of evolved over time.
I love the examination in your book on several American foods and how they came to be American foods after being, brought here by immigrants. I myself have eaten a lot of the things in the book, and I think it's always a surprise for me to find these things and go, oh my God, yeah, I haven't eaten this in years. And I remember, like, having for dinner in high school, like, we'd have pork steak, and we'd have some home fries and some chow chow on the side there, and some biscuits. And these are all things I've seen in your book. And like, it reminds me, like, I remember recently I saw an article about somebody in another country made an American restaurant and had a hamburger. And I'm so sick of hearing about that, like, just hamburgers always being the representation of American food. And to me, I feel like you really kind of brought out the idea of immigrant food, and its transition to American food. Like, I've had runzas at basketball games that were being sold by little ladies at a card table, and you talk about that lovingly in your book. Can you talk about this a little bit more, and how you kind of did research to find out more about this for your book?
Yeah, I mean, I again did sort of what I did when I was learning about Southern cuisine, and traveled as much as I could to kind of experience things firsthand. And I guess high school basketball games, that's a really good that's they occur obviously all around the country, but that's a very sort of Midwestern thing. I use the metaphor of Big Ten football a lot in the book, but those tailgates, those are the types of places where you can sort of experience those foods. But I've talked to people from Wisconsinites, I think, are some of the most fun people to talk to about food, because it's just such a wild food state, and that people don't really understand. And Ohio's actually a really wild and interesting food state also. So here in Chicago, we have people from all over the country, and so I talk to people who were from different places and get their pointers and tips, and use Minneapolis as a home base, and Milwaukee as a home base, and Madison, and St. Louis, and sort of explore the parts in between on those journeys. to try to experience the things that are truly unique and local. And in the process of editing the book and even writing the book, as it took shape, it's like I sort of start to realize there were a lot of things that, in spite of 120,000 words and 300 pages, there's a lot more out there in the Midwest, and there may have to be another book.
I just love I love that you include some really great things in the book that I've heard about so much about and have had friends espouse to me about. Like one of my friends, she's always talking about somebody gets her some, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this correctly, but whenever one of her relatives sends her some geta, is that how
Mm-hmm.
it's pronounced? Yeah,
Yep.
some geta. She's so happy and talks so lovingly about it. And then things like, a hot style Giardera,
Gardenera.
Gardner, yeah. Hot Stella Gardner. I've heard so many people I know that are like regional to Chicago talking about that. And just like I've seen so many loving things. I know this is going to have like, when this hits, it's going to have a lot of people talking about it because it's going to have like things that are their regional things being talked about. And I think they're going to be really thrilled. I read a quote about you that I thought was really wonderful. I wanted to ask you about. It was in the Huffington Post, and it says Paul is unique that he doesn't look forward at what Southern food could be. He's looking backward at what it once was. He loves 100-year-old handwritten recipes, time-honored techniques, and heirloom ingredients. What do you think about that quote?
I think it's actually largely accurate. I definitely have always been interested in history and what makes things work and where things came from. So certainly when I was learning Southern cuisine, and I wanted to understand how people cooked Southern cuisine, before modern industrial products tainted it. And there's a lot more of that in the South than there is in the Midwest, because the Midwest evolved and sort of developed and grew along with industrialization. So industrial food sort of creeps into the Midwestern lexicon a lot earlier in its development than it did in the South. But I have long had a passion for seasonal cooking. It was just something that was instilled in me from a very young age. And I talk about all of those influences in the book, and blackberries, and picking blackberries and strawberries, like we've already mentioned. I wanted to understand how people cooked seasonally in the South, and that meant I had to find books that were maybe predated refrigeration, or reliable refrigeration at least. And I started to find this wealth there in the old cookbook literature, and that became the kind of stuff that I really loved. And also, the handwritten recipes are things that are very personal, and usually it's a mom, in rare cases a dad, an aunt, or a grandma, sharing thoughts and methods about how she feeds her family. And I think that that's one thing that we don't really appreciate in the study of American cultural history. And so the development of foodways, which largely comes out of the University of Mississippi and the Southern Foodways Alliance, like the study of foodways as an academic pursuit, is something that we haven't had, and it's something that is becoming important. And I think it's really important because, certainly until the modern age, people spent a lot of time finding and preparing food. And if you want to understand how people lived, you were looking at how they fed themselves and how they fed one another. And so I think it's a real window into culture and what people value, those types of recipes.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask about something that everybody's talking about right now. If I don't know if you've seen it, or I know that you've talked about it in your book, but the TV show The Bear is really big, and it references Chicago and Chicago food, and also just the idea for many of us who are not working in restaurants, being a chef and working in a restaurant. Have you seen the show? Any opinions on it or thoughts on it?
I have not seen the show, but I know a lot of people who have watched it. And it's funny, from very early in the airing of The Bear last year, people would comment it's the most accurate, representation of a restaurant that I've seen. And some people would say, oh, you would tell me, oh, you should watch it. It's just like a restaurant. And I'm like, no, why would I want to do that during my free time?
Yeah.
So, so I haven't seen it. I think it's great for the city. It's going to be great for Italian beef. My partner's watched it and says it's just fantastic, and he's old and jaded like me. So if he thinks it's a fantastic show, no doubt that it is. But it's just not something, watching a show that takes place in a restaurant is maybe when I'm retired and not living a restaurant every day. I'll go back and pull out the bear out of the archives.
Yeah, you don't want to get PTSD from watching it. I never really thought about it that way. I guess if somebody had a TV show about working in a library, I don't be like, never mind, I'll pass on that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I'd like to say good luck for your book, but I don't think you need it because it's going to be really, really well received. I think people are going to love this. I think it's going to do really well. So
thank you.
All the best to your book. All right. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Sure thing.
Okay. That was my conversation with chef, food writer Paul Fehribach. His new book, Midwestern Food, is out today. You can purchase it via the link in the bio or from all better bookstores. Next week, we'll be talking with Michelle Arabach and Nicole Savita about their important new book, Feeding Each Other, Shaping Change in Food Systems Throughout Relationships, Resetting Our Future. Until then, I'll see you at the library.